Hey guys, welcome back to Advanced Bass Fishing, and appreciate you guys swinging by the channel today. You guys, today we're going to be talking about floating worms, and I want to talk specifically today about the windows that a floating worm works in, because a lot of people think that a floating worm is just a springtime bait. There's other situations that you can catch a lot of bass on a floating worm, and I'm going to identify what those situations are in today's video, and sort of like give you guys sort of the best conditions and scenario where they work for. So we're going to dig into that here in a little bit. Also, guys, before we get started, I will put my Zoom trick worm link in the description of this video. The floating worm is sort of like, that's the name of it, but they don't float. The trick worms that Zoom makes, this is what I use 100% of the time for my floating worm fishing, they sink slowly. It's not like they're up on the surface, but Zoom makes a wide range of colors in the trick worm. So I'll link this in my Tackle Warehouse link in the description of this video if you guys would like to pick up some trick worms in some various colors there. And also, while you're there, guys, if you're looking for a awesome bait cast reel, you guys have probably heard me talking about, guys, check out this Cast King ALTI Elite Bait Cast Reel. This thing is virtually impossible to backlash because this Halo Vortex braking system here, it's got an all titanium spool in it, 4.5 ounces, super light, super strong, alloy frame on it, just built for stout. So I'll put my Cast King link in the description. Just click on that link and you can go to the reel section and get this reel right here. Also, guys, with my discount, use promo code Randy10. It's going to put it below $200. So all that link will be in the description of the video. Really appreciate that. Okay, guys, I love fishing floating worms. Floating worms are so fun to fish. If you've never fished them before, because the reason they're so fun to fish, they're basically like a topwater lure that is not on the top. When I fish a floating worm, I'm fishing it in sight all the time. You know, depending upon the water clarity, they could be an inch under the water, or it could be, I fished it as far down as 3 or 4 feet underwater, but it always, this is back to the same thing, is when I'm fishing a floating worm, I want to see that worm coming back all the way to the boat. That's the way that I fish it. So therefore, you see the fish hit it. I don't care if it's dirty water, if it's up an inch under the water, or if it's way down under the deeper water, you can always see the fish hit the thing. And they hit it a lot of different ways. My favorite floating worm bite, guys, is you're working this thing along the, just under the surface like that, and all of a sudden you see a big old shadow come up out of nowhere, and they come up slow, and they just slow motion, they grab it, and they start swimming away with it. I've had so many fish do that. It's so fun to watch them. So love fishing the floating worm, and it catches quality fish, guys. A floating worm will catch good bass. I mean, it catches lots of 4-pound fish. Super fun bait to fish if you've never fished it. Been around for a long time too. But the thing about a floating worm is, out of all of the lure categories out there, I don't think there's another lure that is so situational as a floating worm. It requires an exact set of conditions for the fish to hit it, because I have never seen a lure that is so dependent upon everything lining up perfect. Because when they're on a floating worm, it's like they're either on it or they're not touching it at all. It's like there's no in between. It's like when you know when they're biting a floating worm because it doesn't take very long to get some bites on it. But if they're not on a floating worm, excuse me, and for whatever, their mood and their personality is not conducive to that type of lure category and style, they won't ever touch the thing. So let's talk a little bit about when you want to fish a floating worm. A floating worm, to me, is all about water temperature. It's not about time of year, it's about water temperature. Now, there's 2 windows that a floating worm is going to work, because there's 2 windows of the year in most lakes across the country where you have this optimum water temperature. That is in the springtime of the year, when the water temperature is between like 58 to 70 degrees. That's the window, 58 to 70. And then again, you have another window in the fall time of the year when that water is between 58 to 70 degrees. So based upon your geographic location in the country, it could be, that window for that water temperature window could be anywhere between, say, February on up into December, depending on how far north or how far south you are. Perfect water temperature for me for a floating worm is like mid-60s. When you got water temperature in the mid-60s, what you have is you have a lot of fish that are in that right mood and personality, and they're in the depth zone to be caught on a floating worm. So that is what I look for more than anything else. Now, while a floating worm has a very small water temperature window and different type of seasonal, productivities with it, it has a wide range of water clarity windows. Water clarity on a floating worm can be all over the place. I've caught bass on a floating worm in 3 and 4 inches of visibility, and I've caught them on a floating worm in 10 or 12 or 15 foot of clarity. It's like it works in a ton of different clarities, and it's more about the water temperature, and it's more about the fish being up in those particular zones. So here's how I like to fish a floating worm, because there's a couple different ways with it. If the water temperatures are in that zone that I'm talking about, and the water is like really clear and it's bright out, I usually like to fish the floating worm pretty fast. So I'll fish it close to the surface, even if the water temperature is clear, regardless of that. Try to keep it moving, trying to get a reaction strike. And you work it like this. You just jerk it like a fast jerk bait, where it just sort of scoots just under like that under the water. But sometimes those fish are a little bit deeper. And say, for example, if there's some lay down trees in the water, even if the water's clear, sometimes I'll throw it out there and I'll let it fall 3 or 4 or 5 foot, and I'll slowly twitch it like that, where it's going slow back and forth like that, 3 or 4 feet under the water, and that'll pull those fish out of that little bit deeper water. So in other words, let me draw you a scenario here. If you're fishing like a flat bank that's got a lot of shallow cover on it, that's when I work it shallow, keep it close to the surface. But let's say, for example, I'm fishing a steep or rocky bank that has like a 45-degree angle and the water's pretty clear. Sometimes I'll drop it down, like I said, 3, 4, or 5 foot, as long as I can see it, and I'll keep it working. Let me give you a couple different scenarios here. I was fishing a Bassmaster tournament at Lake Lanier, Georgia in November years ago. And Lanier was very clear this time of year, 5 or 6 foot of water clarity. And I got on a deal with a floating worm where there would be lay down trees on a steep bank, and the bank dropped off pretty quick, and these lay down trees would be hanging out over 10 or 15 foot of water. So I figured out how they wanted the floating worm. I'd cast that floating worm out off the end of that tree. I'd let it sink down 5 or 6 feet where I could barely see it, and I'd start twitching it just, slow like that, 5 or 6 feet under the water, almost like a jerk bait, and those fish would swim out from underneath that tree and grab it. And I wound up doing good in that tournament. And I've also caught them, just doing that along bare banks, not necessarily around trees. One of my favorite ways to do that is like if you're in the back of a cove and say you're in 15 or 20 foot of water and the water's clear, throw that floating worm right down the middle of the cove and let it sink 5 or 6 feet, and it'll pull those fish out off the bottom to hit that thing. They'll come up and hit it 4 or 5 foot off the bottom. So main thing, guys, with the floating worm, it's you got to know when to throw it, and you got to know how to rig it and how to set it up. I've got a lot of videos, guys. You can refer back to some of my past videos on floating worm as far as the rigging techniques and all that type of stuff. But I just really wanted to cover the windows that it works here in this video. And also, guys, colors is all over the place. Here's what I have found out about colors on floating worms. I use a lot of different colors. I'll use the bubble gums, the chartreuses, the yellows, the whites, those big bright colors. And then I'll use the subtle colors like green pumpkins and watermelons. And I'm using the green pumpkins and watermelons under tough fishing conditions if the water's very, very clear. And I use the bright colors in all different water clarities. I've caught fish on muddy and dirty water on bright colors and gin clear water on bright colors, as long as the fish are active and aggressive. So if you have a low light condition, like it's windy and it's cloudy, and it doesn't matter if the water visibility is 4 inches or 10 foot in visibility, those situations where the fish are aggressive because of the weather that's coming in, like southerly airflow, clouds, low light conditions, falling or steady barometric pressure, those fish will hit those bright colors when they're aggressive. And they also hit the bright colors better early and late in the day. So anyway, guys, just a few overall tips with floating worms there. Hope it helps you guys catch some on it. We'll talk later.